Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the government's latest Brexit Climbdown as they recognise the consequences for their ridiculous plans for replacing the UKCA safety standards mark with the UK's own UKCA version. I'll be explaining just how much disruption this would have caused, why the government have been forced into the Climbdown, and consider what it means for the government's general Brexit strategy. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I'm guessing we're mostly familiar with the CE mark. Products sold in the Europe's economic area, basically, but around the Europe's single market, need to be certified to safety standards with the mark. But as part of Brexit Britain, which must do everything its own way, and even more importantly, not at all in the EU's way. If we're going to do things our way, we'd like to do this way. Oh, but Europe do it that way as well. Oh, we don't want to do it that way. We're going to do it a completely different way. But that's the worst way. Doesn't matter, it's different. So Boris Johnson wanted us to adopt our own safety mark. Now, just as a lot of products in the EU would need the CE marking, so those same products would need the new UKCA mark to be sold and used in Britain. It would allow us to lead the way with our own world-beating standards, which will naturally be better than the EU's. Hurrah, cry the gammons. And in theory, nothing wrong with that if that is the intention. In reality, the intention is clearly to use it as a veil to lower standards. But the practical application falls down quite badly. Certifying products for safety standards costs a lot of money. And it can be a lot of money. So when a manufacturer gets their product certified for use with the CE mark, they offset those costs with their sales. It's a huge market for them. In addition, the CE mark, is respected around the world. So manufacturers around the world, if they sell to multiple different markets, because if the European market has the higher standards, they manufacture it for those standards because then it works in their other markets as well. And there's plenty of sales in the EU. Now imagine that you need the UKCA mark to sell in Britain. You manufacture something and you want to sell it in Britain. So you're going to need the UKCA mark. You still have to pay for the CE mark because you also still want to sell in Europe's single market, much larger, many more customers. But now you have to pay an extra raft of fees to get it certified for the UKCA mark on top. Totally different process because it's a totally different authority. Now imagine that you manufacture, say, car parts. You sell some to Britain, but not enough to make that certification worth your while. So you stop selling those parts in Britain. I mean, you can't. It's illegal to sell those parts without the UKCA mark. And you can't profitably get that mark. So British consumers are without those parts, unless they also happen to be manufactured by someone who is willing to get the mark. That means that they have to do without the part altogether. That will apply to a lot of these parts. All of a sudden, you take your car in for an MOT and are told it needs this particular part, but it doesn't exist in this market. So your car is now permanently unroadworthy. Unless, of course, you'd like to travel to France, get it fixed there and bring it back. So otherwise, scrap it, get another. Great, nice one. Other common issues cited are lifts, medical equipment, things like this. Things where we don't have a lot of them in the country. Imagine a lift not being able to get, or an elevator, depending on where you're from, not being able to get maintenance because the parts can't lawfully be sold in Britain. Too expensive to keep replacing. You can't just, when a part goes, right, you need a whole new lift. You can't keep buying new lifts. Unsustainable. Or medical machines. Imagine an x-ray machine, your hospital break in. Can't afford a new one, of course. Can't get the parts to repair the current one. All of a sudden, no x-ray department. And these are hypothetical examples. This is what was actually going to happen from next January. This is what we were going to be reading about next January. These are parts that are not sold in sufficient quantities in Britain to make it worthwhile paying for safety certification for the British market on top of what they need to pay for the European market. Because you'd still need the CE mark to sell in the much larger EU market. The government had planned to introduce the requirement for UKCA in January 2022, in a few months' time. From that point, maintenance of a whole range of machines that we take for granted would just collapse. So now it seems that the government have finally had this explained to them in simple enough language that they understand, and they've backed down and delayed the implementation of the UKCA mark until January 2023. This time next year, they'll be delaying it until January 2024. It'll never end. Because this isn't like, say, SPS checks on EU goods that we keep delaying, where one day we might actually be in a position to carry them out, and actually, with international trade laws, we have to carry them out. The whole concept of the UKCA mark is not sustainable, ever. It's not something we're going to slowly move towards. We can't ever get there. You know, let's say you manufacture an electric heater, for example. Right now, you have to have it certified with a CE mark. That lets you sell it around the European Economic Area as well as in Britain, because currently the CE mark is recognised in Britain. That means a load of admin and potentially a lot of money. Now, at the moment, given that our standards are basically the same as the EU's, having to get the UKCA mark means carrying out all that admin and expense a second time. Now, I said earlier, if you don't sell enough of that product in Britain, they're just not going to bother, and that just means the sales stop to us. But there will be some manufacturers that go, okay, paying for another round of certification, we get enough sales, it's going to hit our profits, but we could still do that. That's still profitable. We'll still do it. But there's still plenty. The point is, of all the products we can currently get in this country, you've now cut off a load of them because there's plenty of businesses who won't consider it profitable. And then their products are shut off from us. Which also means if they're competing with ones where they do sell a bit more, those ones where they do sell a bit more got more of a monopoly. They can put the prices up. So it hits us both ways. But then what happens when standards become counter to each other? Remember, at the moment, we are intending on diverging standards. So if the EU and the UK standards become incompatible, if it's not just a case that one of them is higher, but the higher one will also cover the lower one, if they're actually incompatible, it won't just be a case of getting both certifications. You'd need two production lines as well. One for the European market, one for the British market. That's a whole load of extra expense. You're setting up an entire production line for it. Again, there may be some manufacturers who sell enough in each market to make it individually worthwhile. But that would still mean a whole raft of businesses who were just about making it profitable with the certification. But now, extra production line? No, mate. So we lose another range of products with the same consequences as before. The inevitable consequence of all this is that consumer choice just gets lower and lower. What we do have gets more and more expensive because there's no competition. You know, and some types of products, not just brands, but types of products completely closed off from us because we just don't get enough. If there's a particular type of machine that just isn't used in sufficient quantities in Britain to be worth manufacturing solely for the British market, we won't have access to them. And that could mean specialised medical equipment, for example. And this is not a problem that is eased with time. This is not something that gets better as we develop our post-Brexit systems. This is a fundamental no-go area. The situation isn't going to magically get better in a year. The reason why the government are delaying it by a year is just another example of kicking the Brexit can down the road. You know, this was the phrase used to attack Theresa May when she kept going for extensions to the Article 50 deadline without a plan for having anything in place when that deadline looms. So we just had another extension and another and another. And the same is now true of Boris Johnson. We've left the EU, that's been dealt with, but he can't actually follow through on his going it alone Brexit strategy because we can't go it alone. You know, Brexit is hitting the brick wall of reality. Afghanistan has highlighted in a particularly devastating way that politically we have no influence around the world now. That's been laid bare this week. But economically, the same is true. Yes, we're a large market and we will remain a large market. But we're also a member of the permanent member of the Security Council for the UN, of the G7, chairing that at the moment. What has Boris Johnson been able to use with this influence? Nothing. He's been able to get no concessions at all for Afghanistan. And economically, we're in the same boat. It's all right saying we're a large market, although not as large a market as we were and getting smaller. but when it's comparative. It's not as large as the European market, nowhere near. So we cannot even pretend to lead on standards. The EU are the world leader on standards, not because they're really persuasive in presentations, not because they make really fun PowerPoints or come up with catchy 3-word slogans. They're world leaders on standards because they represent a massive market of some of the richest consumers in the world. Manufacturers around the world often adopt European standards because you create your product for the highest standards of the markets that you want to sell in. And sure, it will cost them more to manufacture it for the European market. They could just cut it out and sell to other markets, lower standards, but the potential sales are huge. And if they're not, then they won't be available in the EU. The same in theory could apply to British standards. So if we raise our standards above the EU's, if a manufacturer was desperate to sell to Britain, they would have to produce their goods to our standards. And then we would be driving up standards because they're not going to make two different things for different markets if it can just do it for both. You know, if our standards are high and they produce it for our standards, if those standards are also fine in the EU, that is a way of us driving up standards even in the EU. We would be providing that international leadership. That would be coming true. And that is how the UKCA mark is being sold. But for it to become a reality and not just another of Johnson's ill thought out fantasies, two things have to be true. One, we actually need to set our standards higher than the EU does. We're doing the opposite. Secondly, manufacturers around the world, if we did raise those standards, would need to expect to get enough sales in Britain to compensate for the extra expense of just redesigning their products, basically, but also setting up different production lines, engaging in the very costly standard certification, all the rest of it. The sales just don't exist here. They don't, and that's the problem. You can't drive up standards unless you are going to compensate the people who are producing those goods. You have to compensate them for those extra costs by saying, yeah, but there's a right load of sales here. There aren't right a load of sales here. And that reality isn't going to change. This is a pretty good Brexit can to watch, really, because our market's getting smaller and the EU's market's getting larger. You know, so yeah, we can watch Boris Johnson or whoever's in charge kick this can down the road for a long time, because there's no way of doing anything with that can until they realise that the current trajectory is unsustainable. Unfortunately, it's not going to be one of those cans discussed around the hair salons of Britain. Most of the public will be largely unaware of what is actually one of the most obvious examples of how Johnson's Brexit Britain simply cannot exist in the real world. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.